welcome everybody to this year's live stream from Hawk Ridge Systems. We're excited to have you here with us. I know I'm excited to share some content. Freddie, how about you?
I'm very excited. Thanks for having me, Brandon. This is going to be a great time.
Should be a lot of fun. We've got tons of tips and tricks that we're going to share with you guys. We'll give you some background information, share some stories along the way. But we want you guys to hopefully get a whole lot out of this. We see some of you guys in the chat here already. Thanks for joining us. We've got some team members too that are going to help us out in the chat if you do happen to have any questions, so feel free to pop those in there. But we'll be going along. Got a quick agenda that I'll cover with you guys, but don't forget we're going to have some giveaways along the way here too. So my name is Brandon, technical manager for our data solutions here at Hawk Ridge Systems. Been in the channel for about 14 years now. Seen a little bit of everything. With me today, I've got Freddie Corbett.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I'm Freddie Corbett, an applications engineer here at Hawk Ridge Systems. Been certified in SOLIDWORKS at the expert level, as well as administering PDM professional, which is what we're going to be talking about here today.
Yeah, and Freddie and I get to work together pretty frequently, so we always have fun sharing these tips and tricks with you guys. In fact, we got to share a lot of this content at a few locations around the U.S. Here pretty recently, so for those that either weren't local to those areas, couldn't make it out, we're sharing a lot of the same content here today on the live stream, so you should get some good info out of it.
Awesome, yeah. Let's hop into this agenda and let's take a look at what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, sounds good. So first off, I'm going to start with just a bit of background for those in the audience that may not be all that familiar with PDM or PLM, what some of those concepts really mean. A little bit of background on maybe what you do without using a system like that. Then we're going to start to get into some of those tips and tricks for the SOLIDWORKS PDM users and administrators. Freddie's got some great tips to share on the user side of things, a little bit of customization, stuff like that that we can do. And on the admin side, I'll be looking to share a few things that I've encountered over the years that will be helpful tips to keep in your back pocket, things to make your life easier. Towards the end, I want to wrap things up after we've learned a few things to just cover what are some of your options today. We'll be talking mostly about SOLIDWORKS PDM, but as you guys in the audience are aware, there's all kinds of choices that you can make today about different PDM and PLM softwares that you can take advantage of. So that's a bit of where we're going. Let's start with some of that background here first. So for anyone that's new to the concept of PDM, you may have heard this acronym and a bunch of others that go along with it. In the industry that we're in, we hear a lot of those acronyms, right? The 3 letters for whatever it means, and PDM's one that Freddie and I deal with pretty much every day. It stands for Product Data Management, and really what this comes down to is we're managing the files that represent the products we design in a secure and structured way. So you may hear terminology referred to as a vault. A lot of times when we're talking about data management solutions, that's what we use within the context of SOLIDWORKS PDM. There's a vaulting system that keeps our files secure, but more importantly, we can use that as a collaboration mechanism. We can allow other people that may not be involved in CAD work to take advantage of that data. Things like measuring, marking up, participating in a process, even just viewing the files that they can go search for themselves. And that's a huge part of this too, is the searchability. If we're operating just within Windows Explorer, we're pretty limited on what it is we can actually search for when it comes to the files that we create. It's pretty easy for us to make use of that data and go find what we need right at our fingertips. We're also going to talk about the concept of kind of managing the history of those files, typical stuff that's low-hanging fruit for a PDM system. Revision control, right? How can I take an object that represents the part design that I've created, just as an example, and take it throughout its entire life cycle, put a revision on it, not have to create duplicate copies, things of that nature. Which kind of brings me to a point that I want to cover just some of those general concepts with you guys for those operating outside of a PDM system, such as SOLIDWORKS PDM. Freddie and I come across this. We get to talk to a lot of different customers and individuals that maybe have developed their own ways of doing things. And maybe you'll agree with me on this, but a lot of times what we see is people that maybe are just operating in Windows with their SOLIDWORKS designs. A pretty typical way that we would get started to maintain revisions and so forth would be maybe a pack and go, right?
Definitely.
We
Reusing
see that.
that design data.
Yeah, we want to make it unique in some way so that we can design for the next customer. So a lot of times that's adding something to the file name or creating that pack and go that indicates -A, -B, Bob's masterpiece as the revision. Right?
Exactly. Final, but really final.
Those are the situations we don't want to be in because it gets confusing very quickly. And that's where when we manage those files inside of SOLIDWORKS PDM, we can start to take advantage of the tools that are really going to help us out to alleviate some of those issues. So I'll describe a couple of other pretty typical things that we hear from folks that are looking to get into data management. File naming conventions, we already sort of talked a bit about that. If I'm working on a project with Freddie, I might name things a little bit differently than he does, just like the example we gave. Again, that gets confusing very quickly, but more importantly, that mismatch of data can just prevent, or it can cause a lot of issues potentially downstream. People using the wrong components, creating scrap parts when we get to the shop floor, that sort of thing. Same story with conflicting copies. Again, it's just a matter of confusion, but if I'm working on the same project with another engineer and perhaps we don't realize that we both have the same file open, yeah, there are some indicators that'll help us with that, but point being, we've seen this a lot over the years where people step on each other's toes, they overwrite each other's work accidentally. That's another common issue that we can certainly avoid pretty easily in PDM.
Yeah, it's really last to save wins in that kind of scenario, and we don't want that.
Exactly, yeah. File references, another big one.
Oh man, this screen that I see right here, it gets very frustrating.
Oh yeah, we've all seen it before as people that operate SOLIDWORKS. You've opened up your assembly or your drawing. Maybe somebody moves some of those files on you, or maybe they rename them without knowing how to follow the rules with a parametric CAD system. It's a frustration, and it's something that actually, when we work in a PDM software, can be alleviated right out of the box. Because we're working inside of a database-driven system, there's no opportunity for me to break those references. The database is keeping track of all of those objects that represent my CAD data. So I want to make a point here too that I can use tools like moving and renaming just like I would in regular Windows Explorer, but I have to be given permission to do that kind of stuff. And that's more on the admin side of things when we talk about using SOLIDWORKS PDM. We also covered searchability to a certain extent, but really what this comes down to is anybody that's going to get into your system has all the information they need right at their fingertips. So if you think about all the information that's in your SOLIDWORKS files, the custom properties that you use, descriptions, part numbers, revision letter, who created it, this is all searchable data once we start operating within a database-driven system like that, which is super powerful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Really tracking whatever information that's important to you, being able to find that right at your fingertips. You ever try searching this PC on your machine?
Takes forever.
Sometimes you're sitting there for hours, right? And if you don't know that file name, if you're using, part numbering, you don't remember that 10-digit code, after 30 minutes, an hour of waiting for results, you could be finding the wrong information and have to run that search again.
Exactly, yeah. And that kind of alludes to some of the workaround type stuff that we've heard many times in the past. The purpose of things that we hear like, well, I have a smart part numbering system that represents all the file names in my system. That's intentionally there so that people can find things at a glance. But if I have all of these variable fields at my fingertips, the need for something like that tends to go away. So we'll look at some options as far as how I can use that data for searchability. Freddie's got some great tips that he'll share along the way to help me get back to things that I might be working on, want to go find them later, things of that nature.
Not even finding them as well, but finding them quickly.
Yeah,
we'll see about that speed.
So we covered a couple of quick concepts there. When we talk about how SOLIDWORKS PDM can make your life easier as a SOLIDWORKS user, we get rid of a lot of those manual methods that I talked about, which if you don't have a PDM system in place, certainly can be helpful to get you by, but it's nice to have that flexibility of being able to manage stuff in a controlled system, let other people see it in a controlled way. But more importantly, as I'm using SOLIDWORKS, when I do create revisions of the geometry and change the custom properties, maybe move something to a different folder that maybe today makes a bit more sense. Without PDM, all those references get broken. Potentially I end up using incorrect information. but because we're in that database-driven system, it's keeping track of everything in real time. So
that's how it fixes so you don't see that screen anymore.
That's right,
that
exactly.
broken references screen.
Yep.
It makes sense.
Also keep in mind that the concepts we're describing here are not just for SOLIDWORKS files. It's easy for our mind to go there when we say SOLIDWORKS PDM. We think about SOLIDWORKS files. But if you're in a multi-CAD environment, maybe you've got other CAD products that you collaborate with, Inventor, AutoCAD, Solid Edge. There's plugins for some of those tools as well within the PDM professional realm. Maybe you have Office documents that you want to control, or PDFs, or electrical design files. There's a number of different ways that you can get this data into PDM and start managing it with some form of a process. So what I just described there really applies to files that we're creating to represent our product data. And you might be asking yourself some questions at this point. Well, what about the other things that I need to do day to day within my job capabilities, right? I'm managing the files. I've got a good handle on that inside of SOLIDWORKS PDM. We don't have to start from scratch anymore. We eliminated duplicates. We fixed the issues with broken file references. And it's going to do a great job of collecting information for us too. Things like from the CAD file, I can directly get a bill of materials. I don't have to go inside of SOLIDWORKS to get that information. It's right there. I can identify where some of my bottlenecks are at in the process if I've developed some kind of approval process and so forth. But we can kind of start to gear that conversation up to maybe I have other things like people tasks, other departments that want to represent their process. This is where we start to have more of that PLM conversation, product lifecycle management, if you're not familiar with it. Now, I just want to be clear that PDM is a component of a PLM concept or structure. We still have to manage our files. We have to have a way to do that in a structured fashion. But think about all the other departmental processes, the cross-collaboration that you would need to accommodate. Inside of each one of these silos, if you will, within the organization, they're going to have their own way that they want to do things, but ultimately, a lot of it depends on the same information. And to be quite frank, a lot of it can come from the CAD data. So that's really where we start to have the conversation of let's get everyone in one environment under one umbrella that's tied to the CAD data. So maybe I can start to incorporate things like sales processes or support of my product. Maybe I've got marketing folks that I want to work with that use my 3D data that I create. There's all kinds of different ways that we can leverage this information, but the thing to keep in mind with all of this is really the process behind it. There's going to be things that maybe my company does that don't even have a file created yet, and I wanted to kick off a process to go through those steps before I create any product data. It should all be in one common system. And when we say PLM, the first place that most people's mind go to is a software tool, right? PLM software. And that's not wrong by any means, but it's really more of a general concept is the best way that I would put it. The reality is that even if you're not in a common PLM system today, you're still doing PLM. You just might be using disconnected tools to take care of it. Maybe you're tracking ECOs in a spreadsheet or something like that. Well, if we can put it all in one place, that's really the idea behind all of this, the nirvana, if you will, is put it all under one umbrella. So that's the concept to kind of keep in the back of your mind here, and we want to try to eliminate as much back and forth of systems and transfer of data, things of that nature to take place, so that really we can make everybody's lives as easy as possible. So, if I were to break it down into these couple of main themes, if you will, the way that I think about it, PDM is real focused on file management. Typically, it's going to be in the CAD realm, but of course, we can manage other files too. We're going to develop things like electronic approvals, maybe automate some tasks. And when we get into that PLM realm, of course, PDM is part of it, but think about those other robust processes that you want to use and capture information. Maybe you have custom bills of materials that you need to develop, like an EBOM versus MBOM situation. Maybe you wanted to build dashboards for analytics for different departments in your company, representative of what's going on in the system in that common ecosystem. So like I said, that hopefully we can improve everyone's day-to-day and make it as easy as possible for us to kick back, maybe do a little design work and spend the rest of our time on the beach. We can pretty obviously start with SOLIDWORKS PDM, and I think you guys will see some of that here as we go along. all these tips are there to really make our lives as easy as possible. So.
Yeah, especially with a lot of that automation that we're talking about, I wouldn't mind kicking my feet up like that engineer on the beach there.
Yeah, just a few less things to worry about.
Yeah,
absolutely.
maybe not with that clunky computer. I don't know how much we're getting done with that. But,
yeah, probably not so much. I did see some fun facts up on the start screen, though, about how little RAM and stuff SOLIDWORKS used to use.
That's true.
Probably would have worked for this guy, but not so much anymore. All right, so we're going to move on to a few tips and tricks now that we know a bit about what a PDM environment can do for us. Freddie's got some great tips, like I said, from the user side of things for those involved with data management from the design and engineering perspective. So let's cover a couple of quick things here just to introduce us to what concepts we have to talk about. Freddie, what do you got?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Brandon. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off with just a quick overview of some of these tips that we're going to be covering. Again, this is from the user side, right? Brandon's going to be covering a little bit more on that admin side a little later. But we can see here some of the things we're going to be talking about is this move and copy tree. These are two separate functions, but we'll see how basically they'll allow us to reuse that design data. We'll be taking a look at these file notifications as well, able to notify people automatically or create your own notifications to make sure you're up to date on the latest changes. We can also take a look at upgrading files with values. This is a good way to update a bunch of files in bulk with your metadata, right? Maybe reusing it from one project to another. We want to ensure all of that data is up to date.
Oh yeah, that comes up a lot for sure.
100%.
You know, we don't. All the stuff you've mentioned here so far, we don't want to reinvent the wheel every time, right? We should just be able to use that design data that we had for the last project and move it over. I like where you're going with that updating file values. So
yeah, we'll see some good examples for that. I'm excited to look into that one.
Excellent.
Yeah, we also have some search favorites as well. We were talking a lot about not only do you not search for just file names, but really any kind of metadata. And also we'll see how quickly we can search with this. With our search favorites, basically one click, we can get all that information right at our fingertips.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, and really a lot of the time that we've been talking about this, we've been talking about kind of that interface more in the Windows File Explorer, right? What does it look like for maybe a manager or somebody who doesn't use SOLIDWORKS as much? We also have the SOLIDWORKS add-in that we'll be taking a look at the end. So really your engineers are most likely going to be working in SOLIDWORKS all the time. They're not going to have to flip back and forth between these two separate environments to do all of these PDM actions like taking ownership of a file or pushing it through a workflow.
That's right.
We could do that all right inside of SOLIDWORKS.
That's where we get to spend a lot of our time, fortunately.
Fortunately, yeah, exactly.
PDM plugs right into it.
I love it in there, and it's a good time that I can be able to, you know, take ownership of those files that I need to, or, you know, send it to approval, let you know, hey, I've been working on this. Can you go ahead and approve that for me? Absolutely.
Well, let's work down the list.
Yeah, sounds good. So the first thing that we're going to be taking a look at is this move and copy tree. Again, these are two separate functions. I do want to mention that this move tree is a PDM Pro only feature. But really what this is going to allow us to do is kind of move and copy these file references. So I have an example right here where I have this top level drawing with all of my assemblies, and this is a very similar project that I've already designed, and another customer maybe wants this same project but with just a few tweaks. So what
Pretty common, yeah.
Yeah, so what I can do here is use this copy tree tool. And what I'm doing is I'm taking this project from my project 7 folder, and I'm going to copy it on over to my project 8 folder, right? I got a nice spot here for my design data. And this could be for, you know, a new project, a new customer, but again, very similar files. So notice I've been doing this copy tree, and I have these additional PDM functionalities, such as leaving a comment, letting people know why I'm copying this tree, things like that. So I'll go ahead and I'll press OK, and in just a few seconds here you can see it really doesn't take too long. It takes all of my referenced files here, and it's going to move them over to my project 8 folder. So let's go take a look inside of my project 8 and see all of that copy that we've made. So inside of my project 8 design data folder, right, I've taken that top level assembly and all of its referenced files, and they now live in this new project folder. I mentioned earlier as well we had move tree. Well, we can use that as well, and you don't always have to actually move the files. I'm really just going to use this move tree here for its pack and go like abilities. So notice, I can rename with a prefix or a suffix, or you'll even see that button there with PDM Professional, I can rename with a serial number as well. So if I add a suffix of -copied to all of these files, notice all of these yellow files have now changed their name all at the same time. But what do you notice here? You see some of these white files, right?
Yeah, I see a bunch of stuff that's excluded, and I think I know why, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, if you look at that folder location, you'll see that it's actually living in the design library.
Right. Okay.
So what's happening here is actually on the admin side of things, in the background, my admin said, you're not allowed to copy any of those files from my design library, right?
Yeah, that's perfect, and that's exactly the way it should be, in my opinion. We don't want a bunch of different copies of the same half-inch bolt hanging out in different folders throughout our vault. So we've kind of locked that down with the perspective of, okay, you can use those components. You guys all have access to it, but we're not going to change them. We don't need to copy them outside of a project ever. That type of thing really helps to eliminate some of those duplicates. And I just want to mention too that we went through a couple of steps there, like using copy tree and move tree. Just keep in mind that you can use one of those operations and it would still rename, like Freddie pointed out. You can rename with serial number, so if you're going to use that as your part numbering scheme, you don't have to do it as separate operations. It can be all in one shot if you wanted to, but good way to show some handy capabilities that you may not have thought about.
Definitely.
Move doesn't have to mean move. It's a nice way to just, create new names for things.
Exactly. Achieving the one goal, doing it all in bulk, right? Renaming all of these files. And I really like that we excluded that design library, right? Those purchased components, right? Just hardware. It's never going to change. I don't need a new revision of those files. We just want to use them in another project. And with tools like our Where Used tab, in my design library, I could have one bolt that's being used in 40 different assemblies.
Yeah, and PDM will tell us all that information too, like where it has been used. If you're going to affect change on something, you can do a bit of that investigation before you actually change whatever it is you're looking at, just to kind of know the impact.
Yeah, great point there, Brandon. So moving on to our next tip here, we have file notifications. So these will allow us to send updates on recent changes that have occurred inside of our vault, right? And you'll see in this example that I have set up here, we have an automatic notification, right? So maybe I have an approval process and I've been working on this design data for a while and I say, let me send this over to Brandon here. I'll check his name in that bottom right corner and I'll say, I'm going to notify Brandon that, I'm done with this design data and I need you to go approve that. So we'll log in from Brandon's aspect here, see what from his perspective, and we're going to take a look at this notification here. So I actually have an inbox directly inside of PDM here. You can see that when I go to this Tools inbox, it's going to open up this inbox directly inside of my PDM vault. And with PDM Professional, you can actually set these notifications up to go directly to your email as well. So you can see that I've pushed this file through and I said, here's all of the references. It went from under editing to waiting for approval. It was performed by me on this date and this time. And Brandon, with one simple click, can bring himself to this file location and take a look at it, right? And I can then decide whether I want to approve or reject that.
Yeah, that's awesome. A good way for us to collaborate, and we do that kind of stuff all the time.
Definitely.
He can send me notifications, but I'll be honest, I get a lot of notifications, so I'm probably going to dismiss it at some point, but I know you've got some tips for that.
Yeah, I can help you out with that one, but I appreciate your honesty. What I also want to show here is you can also create some custom notifications. So Brandon brought up a really good point. He mentioned, I'm passing these things through the workflow and that notification was sent to him automatically. If we set up a ton of notifications inside of our workflow and I'm getting flooded with notifications, I can't really blame Brandon for dismissing that, right? So a good idea is to kind of limit these workflow notifications to the really important ones. And what we can do, as you're seeing on the screen here, is we can create our own custom notifications. So I can say as the user, let me know when this file's been checked out, right? I just copied this project over. I've been working on it for months and it's really important to me. I don't want anybody to go ahead and make a change to that. So I'm going to say, notify me when this file's checked out. If anybody in the company checks this file out, I'm going to be notified. And I'll say, oh, it's Brandon. He's probably just approving it, hopefully.
I love that. And from the engineer perspective, we can sort of keep an eye on things from maybe our project, right? If it's not supposed to be checked out, or if I want to know, hey, someone requested a change on this particular file.
Exactly.
That's a pretty nice way to do it. I'm also thinking about more of the admin side of things, as in if somebody shouldn't have permission to do one of those things, like check a file out, that could be a way for me to keep an eye on specific things too. And you can set that up more on the back end as well for things like a state change. But
that's a great point. Yeah, we've brought up permissions a lot. That's a really important aspect. So the next thing that I want to talk about here is update files with values. So this example here is, think about what we've just done, right? We're reusing this design data. We're able to update this metadata all in bulk. So let's go back to that same example I was using before. We've copied this project into project 8, but check out my data card there. That project field is blank for the project number. We copied it from project 7 to project 8. I can see on my folder data card right here that I have that project 8 serial number right there. What I can do is I can go ahead and check out all of those files, right? If I'm making a change to the files, maybe I'm not actually making a design change, but I'm changing its metadata, the information about the part. So I need to go ahead and I'm going to check out all those files from just selecting that folder. And here you can say, update the values in the files. So we have a couple of filter options here, right? I could type in -copied if I wanted to filter out just those copied ones. Or I could choose by workflow state, right? So we have a couple of options on how we can filter out all the files in the folder. I can see here are all of my options, and I'll check all of those on. We can say, which variable from my folder data card do I want to push to all those files? So I've gone ahead and I've checked my project number, and we're going to go ahead and press finish. It's got enough information. And now what we're going to do is take that project 8 number, that information from the folder card, and you can see now all of those files now have that information on their data card.
very nice. Exactly what we want. For all those unique items, when we go from project to project, the thing that always comes to mind for me is, what if I wanted to go search for a bracket that belongs to project 8 or that we designed for this customer? The concept that you're talking about here is really to deal with stuff at that project level, right?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And all these other variables that we might use for our custom properties for SOLIDWORKS, obviously there's a lot of ways to update those, but hopefully this will help you guys out for those sort of mass update type of operations where we've got a lot of project level stuff to deal with.
Yeah, and it's really important when a big aspect we've been talking about this whole time is reusing design data, right? Think about that example we were talking about before. We were working in project 7 with customer A, and customer B just ordered a very similar thing. We'll go ahead and we'll reuse that design data, and we can say, let's update that value with the new customer. Right? We'll say all of those files, let's go ahead and say this is now for customer B.
Yeah,
so
pretty easy.
Yeah, very easy that we can do there. So let's go ahead, and something that we've been talking about a lot here is our favorite searches, or just searching in general, right? I wanted to bring up a few different ways on how we can rerun frequent searches, or really just find our information very quickly. So if we take a look at this example here, the first thing that I want to say is, Brandon and I have been collaborating on a project frequently. And I want to say, I want to work on this project, but I want to know what Brandon has checked out. By running this complete search, you can see that I can choose Brandon's username here, run a search to display all the files he has checked out, and I can see, great, he doesn't have any of the data or the design that I want checked out. I can go work on that. And maybe what I'll do is by pressing that blue star, I can save this search. Run it frequently so that maybe at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, right? Maybe you want to know which files do I need to check in. At the end of the day, you go ahead and you run this search. Oh, I have these files checked out. Let me go ahead and check them back in case anybody needs those.
Yeah.
And you can see that that favorite search lives right there. With one click, we're able to rerun that.
Super handy. And we get that question a lot where users will need to know, what files do I have checked out? I pretty much use this exclusively for that, as checking for my own checked out files, so I can just run it all in batch and check them in at the end of the day.
Definitely. And before you were telling me, you keep dismissing my messages, man. I understand that you can get flooded sometimes, but let me help you out here. I'm actually creating a favorite search for waiting for approval state of my workflow.
Oh, that's so nice of you, Freddie. I appreciate
that. And I
that.
even gave you permission right there so you can use it.
That's awesome. So you can share these with other individuals and groups in the vault.
Exactly. And with one click, you can see all of the files that are waiting for approval. And I can see you've dismissed a lot of my messages there, but I understand. You got a lot on your plate.
I'll get back to it. I'm sorry, man.
If you ever get to, if you ever have multi-vault environments for any of you guys out there, this search tool inside of PDM Professional allows you to run these searches between multiple vaults. And even if I've created one too many of these favorite searches, I just found out about it, got really excited, and I created 10 of these favorite searches, I'm probably only going to use 2. That search tool right there was another way that we can go ahead and organize, remove those or give other properties, right? Maybe I forgot to give you permission to use that waiting for approval one. I can go ahead and re-give you that permission through there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we can go back there to manage it. The other thing I'm thinking about too with sharing those searches, let's say that I have a few people in the manager group. Now there's other ways around this, but let's say that I'm out of the office and I want some other people to be able to approve those files. We shared that search with them, so that's a real easy button they can just go click and say, this is all the stuff that's waiting. Let's take care of it.
Exactly. Never miss a notification again.
I like it, Freddie.
Awesome. So the last thing that I want to show here is we've talked about as an engineer, most of the time you're inside of SOLIDWORKS, right? And I want to be able to check these files out or submit them for approval, send you that notification. Well, directly inside of SOLIDWORKS, you can see here in this task pane on the right-hand side, I have a PDM add-in, which allows me to check out, check in. I can push it through my workflow right here. Brandon and I can open this together and decide, do we want to approve or reject this? I could take a look at that data card. Check out that project 8 right there. You saw that from
Very
before?
nice.
Yeah. So we can see, right, we have a bunch of functionality. We get a nice preview of our files, and even in the bottom right-hand corner, we get some additional information that's important to us about our part. And we'll even be able to see how we can customize this information as well. So you'll see I'm going to go up to Tools here, and under SOLIDWORKS PDM, I can open up this Options menu. I have one quick option that I want to share with you right here before we get into customizing that view. But if you take a look at the second one here, Show File Data Card when file is created, what we can do is your engineers are most likely going to be creating new files inside of SOLIDWORKS.
Makes sense.
I want to be able to show them that data card so they don't have to flip back to the vault view. They can fill out that necessary information right up top, description, things like that. Right?
Great way to stay consistent. And honestly, I leave that option turned on for myself so I don't forget to fill things in as I'm designing.
Yeah, and speaking of that description here, you'll see under the View Settings tab, I even have the availability to choose my favorite variables here. So in my case, I'm using description, and I've turned everything on. What we can do is we can represent our favorite variables or pieces of information wherever we see comfortable. So you can see here I have a row showing me the description. I even have a column showing me a description for each individual part as well, right? So again, I don't have to flip back and forth between these two separate environments. I can get all of this information from SOLIDWORKS, even in that bottom right-hand corner. So I can flip between multiple parts, see their descriptions, right? Just select the part, see that part's description. I don't need to go ahead and flip back and forth or check the data card for every single file.
Yeah, this is really nice because I don't have to jump back and forth between multiple tools like you said, but just like everything that you're used to in SOLIDWORKS, all of our favorite tools, this is configurable. You can choose which way you want to work with it and where you want to see information. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so whatever way makes you feel comfortable, right? Whether you decide you like to make your files on the File Explorer or you like to make them inside of SOLIDWORKS, we have options for you.
Excellent. Freddie, great tips, brother. I appreciate it.
Put it there, brother.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and get away to our giveaway time. And it looks like we have a few prizes here to give away to you guys. So for our first prize, we have some of these Tetris lamps. These are pretty cool, Brandon.
That looks
wouldn't you
fun.
say?
I'm a Tetris guy. I like Tetris.
Yeah, you got to be careful though. If you make a full row, you might lose a couple lights.
Maybe.
So for our first winners, we have Brooke Brazos. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And we also have Hassan Ubrumi. Congratulations to you both on your Tetris lamps. We hope you enjoy them and keep you well lit throughout the night.
Yeah, I hope it goes nice in your office or on your nightstand, wherever you want to put it. That's probably where I'd put it.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty cool.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to transition now into some of the tips and tricks for administrators and how we can maybe make their life a little bit easier, taking advantage of a few different strategies. So as I go through this, some of what we're going to talk about is I would say more along the lines of trying to plan for growth or plan your implementation, really to take better advantage of the tools is kind of what I would say. Freddie, I know this comes up a lot for us in conversations where people need to plan for expansion or hiring or creation of a lot of new data. Sometimes we get to a point where we're beginning to run out of space.
Yeah, I actually get this question a lot about managing disk space on the server. Is there any tools that the admin user can use to help manage that?
Yeah, of course. The first couple that we're going to cover here are some strategies built in the software to help us with that. And I'll talk more about some alternatives before we even get into that, because these are kind of, I would say, your backup plan is a good way to think about that. Now, we do also have a couple of tools that I'll mention where some of it, you may need our assistance to get it up and running. I'll explain why when we get there, but digging into the nitty-gritty of details about your vault and how we can improve performance or plan for these secondary phases of implementation, we've got some tools that can help you out there. We're also going to focus a bit on automation too, which, Freddie, I know both of us get excited about when we start talking PDM. How can I take things off of people's plates so they don't have to remember to click a button to save a file, like a step file or PDF, those kind of things.
How can we have our engineers kick their feet up on the beach?
That's right. That's the goal. We're also going to keep track of some of the information that we create, making sure that we know where it goes with some new enhancements that have been in the last couple of years now of SOLIDWORKS PDM, as well as a nice one to keep in your back pocket if you're setting up new client machines or maybe you've moved servers or something like that. How can I test to make sure that I can get all of the tools that I need on each workstation? Now, I do also want to mention there's a slide or two in here where there's resources you can download from the DS or SOLIDWORKS knowledge base. Pay attention for those where it might say QA and then a code or S- and then a code. Those are solution IDs that you can even look up yourself if you have access to the knowledge base to go find some of these tools that we're going to talk about or solutions that we mentioned. If there's something you hear today or maybe things that we didn't cover that you need advice on or you're not sure where to find it, you can always reach out to us. We're happy to help anytime. So let's talk first about that concept you mentioned, Freddie, of I'm starting to run out of space on the server. What do I do about it? That's a conversation that we have pretty frequently. Now, in this day and age, it's pretty common that we would just say, well, why don't you add more space? If I have the resources and the budget for it, it's pretty easy to add another hard drive, or if I'm working on a VM, I can just upgrade to add more storage. Those types of things are usually the first thing in people's mind, but sometimes that's not an option. I've had that conversation too before. Maybe it's, we already have some other resources that we should be using, like a drive that isn't quite full yet. We need to offload some information onto. That's where we tend to talk about tools that are built into the PDM software if adding space is not an option for you. And one of those is called cold storage. The other one that I'm going to mention here, I would call it along the same lines, but maybe a bonus tip here, is splitting of your archives. And we'll talk about both of these strategies here. The first thing that I want you to wrap your head around is what exactly does cold storage do? And it's easiest to see this kind of from the user perspective. If I think about a design that I've created and it's been through a bunch of different revision cycles and maybe I've checked it out and back in a bunch of times, I've created multiple versions of that file in the archives. So let's say for this example you see up on screen, it's been revision stamped a total of 3 times, but I've also checked it in and out quite a bit, so it's up to version 12. The way that cold storage works is you're specifying the last number of versions that you wish to keep in the archives, and the rest can be offloaded either to another media device or you could delete them entirely, which the latter, I would say, is not my choice. I would prefer not to delete anything. I would like to have a path to go back to something if possible, but if that's how your company operates, where if you're pretty sure that we're not going to go back to some of that old information, you could also delete it to save space too. Now in this example here, if we think about, let's say I'm going to keep the last 5 versions of this 12 version file, well, that would mean that I'm going to keep everything from 12 all the way back to number 8, but I also have a way that I can keep everything that's marked as a revision, and that's typically an important concept for customers that we talk to. I want to be able to keep all the released data. That's probably what's going to be most important to you. So we do have a way that we can keep everything that essentially has been marked with a revision. That's pretty easy to do.
That's really cool that you can kind of keep those milestones, those checkpoints of those revisions, right?
Yep, absolutely.
important that you can get back to those.
Yeah.
So for the cold storage, when you set it up, do you have to run it every single time you want to save those files?
No, that's a good question. It's actually something that kind of happens behind the scenes. You put this on a schedule, if you will, through the administration side. I can tell it how often I want it to run this cold storage schema, and it would either offload or delete those files. And it's actually pretty easy to get to. So we'll take a quick look here from the administration tool. I'm going to go ahead and log into one of my vaults, and you can actually see I'm logged into my sandbox vault here as the admin. One of the quick tips I'll offer you guys, this was actually a 2023 enhancement, so bonus tip here for SOLIDWORKS PDM. If you go into your admin tool under settings, there's a way that you can just set up the administration tool to automatically log you in for a particular vault. So you would just say, hey, every time I open the admin tool, I want to be automatically logged into the dev sandbox. You can turn that option on, put in the admin credentials or whoever you want to log in as. It's a really nice option, just to save you a few clicks.
Save you some time there, definitely.
For sure. So I already am connected to this one. Looking at cold storage, it's pretty simple to get to. It's just another node that exists in your admin tree. We're going to define a new cold storage schema. You can give it whatever name you want. If you're in a replicated environment, you're going to set this up on all of your archive servers to potentially save space on all of them and make sure that all the files know where they're supposed to be. Here's where you're going to make that choice of deleting or moving the files to a different device. So if you had a file path here that you wanted to include to maybe put it on a different drive or what have you, as long as it's a network accessible location that I can browse to, that's all fair game to go ahead and put in here. But you'll also notice I can implement variables with this. So as Freddie alluded to, when I start to put this on a schedule, I might want to capture when exactly did I create that cold storage media set. Okay, if I'm looking at a folder, I could separate it by maybe the year and the month code or the day code. There's also counters that are built in here if you wanted to use some of those. You can also define the media name itself when it creates the folders and the files within it. You can use some of that counter system schema with those variables. Down below is where you're going to tell it how many of the versions do you actually want to keep, as I mentioned before. So if I were to go 5 here, keeps the last 5 in my history, and it's always going to keep the ones that have a revision stamp on them. So again, if you're looking to always keep release data, you're probably going to want to turn that option on. Towards the right-hand side, this is where we have the ability to sort of narrow the scope of this if you wanted to. Right now I have it set up to run cold storage for the entire vault, but you could also say, well, maybe I'm only going to run it for the engineering projects folder. If I have other file types in the vault, maybe they don't get revised as often, I could just keep those the standard way and everything else in engineering projects gets cold stored. Lastly, this is where you're going to define your schedule. And there's a few different ways you can make this work. There are some predefined schedules, and the way that this is set up is you have an increment for everything from your minute to your hour to your weekday. So that's the 3 intervals that we're actually changing here. From the predefined ones, you can pick from the one that you like here. So maybe you run this every weekday at midnight. If you wanted to run it a bit more frequently than that, you certainly could. There's a user-defined schedule here as well. Just to give you a sense of what it is we're talking about here for those interval strings, I can use a wildcard in the place of this. So if I were to say what it is right now, I have essentially at midnight every single day, it's set up to run at that time, but I could say run it maybe every minute of every hour of every day. Definitely overkill, but just so you understand how some of those wildcards work within this context, you can define your own custom schema there. And like I said, you wouldn't want to run it this frequently because you're going to create a whole bunch of cold store locations. But for whatever makes sense here, you can capture those based on your own intervals.
Oh, nice. So that's that schedule you're talking about. This is kind of like a set it and forget it thing. You don't have to do this every single time you want to run cold storage.
Pretty much, yeah.
Nice.
And the thing that is nice about it from the user perspective too is they can still retrieve some of that information like you may have seen on the slide that I had up. They would be able to see from the file history, oh, okay, there's a few items in cold storage here, and I can limit permissions for who's allowed to retrieve those if I wanted to control that. Definitely some good controls that we can put in place around controlling how much space we use.
Definitely.
So along with this concept, there's also an alternative to what I described there. Cold storage would be one way to limit the amount of data that we're putting on the archive server, but we can also think about splitting the archives themselves. Those of you familiar with what's happening behind the scenes for PDM, you know that there's physical files that get stored on the archive server and they're organized in a particular folder structure. We use a hexadecimal format to code all these things. We shouldn't be digging around there for any reason. That's not how we operate PDM, but behind the scenes, that is the indexing system that it essentially uses to keep track of all the file versions. Now, there's nothing that really says you have to keep it all in one massive folder. You could actually split this up onto multiple drives if you wanted to. Maybe you've got a couple other locations that you can leverage that have some disk space available. So maybe I'm going to put half of the archives on the C drive and the other half on the D drive. This kind of kills two birds with one stone if I were to take this approach. If I have an available device, but now I'm saying I'm going to take half of what's on the C drive and offload it elsewhere, that's a pretty decent strategy to plan for growth. Now I've got space available on both of those drives that I can use to grow moving forward. And what this will typically look like, just to give you a sense of how to get to these tools, this is probably the most automated way to do it, but I will mention that moving the archives manually is an option. You could just literally cut and paste those folders to a different location, but you do have some registry remapping that you'd have to do in a case like that. On your server, you'll just come down to the Start menu, type in the first few letters of archive. There's my archive configuration tool, and what do you know? It actually didn't pop up here. You ever run into this, Freddie?
I've had this happen one too many times.
Yeah. It's a common question that we get. So if that ever happens to you when you log into your server, just check in the system tray. That archive server utility is probably still running. It's a tool that once you open it, it stays running. But when you close it, it just goes to the system tray. So definitely make sure you look there if something doesn't look right. But in this archive location, we can see the archive controls for all the vaults that we've created, and I've got quite a few of them on my system here. I'll pick on that sandbox again and just show you the properties. So this is where we're going to control quite a few things about how the archive server works, but most importantly, this relocate option is what we're talking about when we say archive splitting. This is the automated tool that allows you to perform that relocation. So what I would do in a case like this is say I'm going to add another media, another archive location, and you can specify whatever path you want here. So looks like I am starting to run out of disk space, honestly. So maybe I'm going to pick this Hawkridge Systems files location, and I'm going to say I want 50% of the files to go there.
What happens if you mess this up? I'm not thinking straight, and maybe what if I do 70% here and 10% here? Am I going to miss out on that 20%?
If you notice here, it's actually making it impossible for me to screw this up. So it says total size here is 150%. Well, that's not possible for me to set it up that way. So what it's doing is giving you some feedback to say,
I see that there.
Did you actually match all this up correctly? So if I'm going to go 50 in the HRS files location, the other 50% will have to be in whichever media I've specified.
There you go, and now that light turns green. That's
right.
Pretty cool.
I get the green light now, so it's okay for me to click OK. What it's going to do at that point is start the transition process and move those files over. So it's all just business as usual at that point.
It almost makes it impossible for you to mess it up there with that light system.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we covered a couple of strategies there on sort of planning for growth, or if you're coming up against a limit where you need to increase the amount of space you have. Those are a couple of built-in things within the software that should help you out as far as that goes. Moving along to a few other things, we talked about automation before and how we can make people's lives easier. Mm-hmm. I know that one that we talk about pretty frequently is maybe I want a PDF file of my drawings and a step file of my solid models. There are some different ways you can make those configurations depending on what version of PDM you have. So with PDM Standard, if that's what you're currently using, you can do SOLIDWORKS drawings to a PDF, and that would go inside your vault. With PDM Pro, though, you have quite a few more options available. In fact, you could take it to the level of even developing your own solutions. In fact, we have partners that do that and develop custom things for integrating with PDM. But the point is, there's a lot of stuff that you can probably take advantage of right out of the box too. So with PDM Professional, I want to mention an enhancement here that's been around for a long time, but a lot of people aren't currently using, but it can be particularly handy. They introduce some conversion tasks for Office files to go to PDF, as well as draft site files to go to PDF. So if you have DXFs that need to be saved out as PDF, maybe you've got an Excel spreadsheet or Word document, if you're going to develop a instruction manual, for example, and you're going to send that to your customers. PDF is nice and lightweight. It's something that they're not editing the native format. I can just kick it out real quick. And probably the biggest part of this to take away is I can make it part of my workflow just like I would with SOLIDWORKS files. It's super easy to do that. I want to show you guys for just a moment, if you wanted to take advantage of a couple of these tools, where would you get access to them? There are some that are out of the box that are super simple to get to. All you would do is just open up your administration tool, hit File, Open, and there's actually a folder location. When you install PDM, some of the server components will include default data, which essentially gives you some sample files, is a good way to describe this. There's admin export files, that's what the .cex is. You can open those up and take a look at what does this actually do for me. So some great examples in here. You're probably already using the convert task here that's kind of built in. Design checker doesn't get a lot of love, but honestly, I think it's one that more people should take a look at. Design checker does all kinds of things like check my drafting standard of drawings, make sure I have fully defined sketches. Heck, you could use that if you wanted to send things for approval and make sure that you're not wasting your time. Do the design checker as part of the transition. Alert the engineer they've got something else to work on. The two that I was mentioning before, draft site to PDF and Office to PDF, you can see those towards the bottom. You can open those up and just kind of see what they're about, but honestly, they're pretty similar to what you would experience with the SOLIDWORKS task that's already there in PDM for most of you. You can see what add-in it's going to load, how the task is configured, and it's real simple to just drag and drop this right into your Vault environment. That's how you would add it in. I would also recommend that if you're going to start to implement some of these new things, do it in a test vault, and if you don't have one, need some advice on how to set it up, we can certainly guide you along the right path.
That's awesome that you can really automate that file conversion there. Every time when you do that, does it always save inside of your Vault, or what happens if people need to see it that maybe don't have access to my Vault?
That's a good question, and actually the question comes up pretty frequently. How would I incorporate other people into that maybe are not in PDM right now? The goal would be, and my advice is, you're going to duplicate data if I'm taking it outside the Vault, right? And that's why
true.
we have PDM in the first place, is to get rid of duplicates.
Exactly.
Now, the fact that we can automate it does help a little bit with that, but to kind of give you some context on what this tool can do, the task conversion has the ability to essentially save anything that's allowed in SOLIDWORKS, and I'm talking about the default SOLIDWORKS task add-in. For PDM Professional, you're able to save a step file of your models or a DXF of your sheet metal flat pattern, maybe a Parasolid, as well as your PDF copy of your drawing. This can all be configured just by choosing those file types, and many of our customers have multiples of these set up to do all those file conversions. The other portion of this, though, with PDM Professional is I can share those files to a secondary output path. And the example that we gave before is perhaps folks that don't have PDM installed, or maybe I don't have enough licenses yet to do this. We can export that information out, but the other option that you might consider here is maybe I have downstream systems that are consuming that released data, the PDFs that I'm outputting. If I had an ERP system, for example, that's listening to that folder location for released PDFs, this would be a pretty decent way to automate those and just output the file export.
That's a great point.
Now, there are other ways to accommodate those connections, like an integration one way or the other between PDM Pro and an ERP system or a PLM. But this is kind of an out of the box. If I'm only worried about those files, very easy way to do it. We talked a little bit about information that we're creating in the Vault and getting a better handle on really how I can improve my experience, maybe get better performance, or if I'm having particular issues that I want help accommodating within the environment. There is actually a tool that we have access to as a value-added reseller called the Status Report tool. And this will give us some good information about your Vault. So really we would just need access to your database, but it's a pretty lightweight executable that we can just run, connect to your database, and understand a bit more about how your vault operates and get some historical data about it. So here you see some examples of essentially just poking through information that's relevant to one of my vaults. Maybe if I want to get a good understanding of the server machine that it's on. For example, does it have enough RAM per the recommendations? Do I have enough disk space? I can get some of those basic checks done. But in these diagnostics, I can also see a whole lot of information about historical data of the vault or information that's been created. For example, if you have a bunch of variables that potentially are unused, or if you wanted to see information about, well, what's in my SQL tables? Maybe there's some fragmentation of some of those tables that we need to address for performance issues. This is a tool that when we're doing something like an assessment of your vault situation, which you may have attended a webinar earlier this month about assessments, this might be a tool that we would use in conjunction with whatever it is we're discussing. If you need improvements to your PDM environment, we'd probably want to dig in there and get some specifics. So if you're having some issues, need some advice on where to go for improving PDM, talk to us. We'd be able to use some of those tools to help kind of set the focus of what it is we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I really like that status report tool because it gives you those visuals of all those graphs and really gives you a quick glance as to, is there anything wrong or funky going on, or is everything in tip-top shape?
Exactly, and that's what we would all want to see, right? We're visual by nature, most of us, so if I can see a graph that shows a huge spike year over year, hey, I created double the amount of data versus last year for what I'm doing today, maybe I use that to help myself plan for growth.
Exactly. You don't have to dig in and try to find that in a spreadsheet full of numbers and things like that. It's represented pretty well for you right there.
Exactly. And speaking of finding things, there's another tool that I want to share with you guys that is relatively new. This came out in the 2023 version of SOLIDWORKS PDM, but we actually have a way to track specific transactions that happen with your files. So in prior years, of course, we had things like the file history we could take advantage of to actually see, who created a revision of a file, who was the last person to send it to the next version, stuff like that. We actually can track that a bit more in detail now to the level of where were the files cached? And I've had this question come up quite a few times over the years. It's actually a property of the vault that you can enable to use the get log. We simply have to turn that on for the vault environment we're talking about. But I can actually show the history of all those get transactions. And this has been enhanced too in the 2024 version to include even more granular tracking of this information. But you could save this out to a log file, parse through it and see who exactly has gotten data to their computer, especially for our customers that are heavily controlled by regulations, things like ITAR, export control. It's very important to understand where your data is going. So I could get like the IP address, the computer name, the user that actually performed the action. It's very granular.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Right inside of PDM, you have your files history. You can see what has changed to these files. You can see the comments people left on it. But with that get log, you can really see where did these files come from and where did they go.
Absolutely. A lot of good stuff there to take advantage of. So if you're in that situation of needing to track down where my data is going, definitely take advantage of that tool. And if you're on an older version, that might be enough reason to get upgraded.
Exactly. Good point.
All right, this last one that I'm going to talk about here is a good tool to have as an administrator in your back pocket. Think about situations where you had to set up a new client computer, you got a new hire, or maybe you moved your vault to another server and you want to test to make sure that the clients can get access to what they need. We have what's called the connectivity test tool, and it's been around for several years. It's one that you can download from the knowledge base. The SOLIDWORKS and DS provides this for us. But it's going to run all those standard tests. And the point with this is it's all in a one-stop shop. I don't have to go to the command prompt and my license manager and a bunch of other tools to see what I need to see. We're simply just testing for the bare bones minimum of, can I get into PDM? Am I able to access the information from the database? I can run all these tests in real time, all in one place. And you can see here that it puts in all the standard ports. If you've done some configuration on that to do things a little differently, you have control over testing those. But the point is, it's going to see all the stuff that is important to those client PCs. Getting a license, can I access the database? You can even output this to a log if you wanted to parse through it and get a bit more detail. But definitely one that is, for an administrator, a handy tool that you should keep in your back pocket for any time that you need it for new setup or perhaps moving to a different system.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's really helpful for people who are kind of more on that IT side, having to set up the server for themselves and things like that. Making sure everything's running smooth. Always important.
Exactly. All right, so we've taken advantage of a bunch of great tips here, hopefully to help you guys from the user side and the administration side of SOLIDWORKS PDM, just to make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. Now, with some of the new tools that you've learned about today, you might be asking a bit more questions of what else can I do with it? Where do I need to start with some of this? Maybe am I pushing PDM a little further than it's supposed to go? That's where we want to talk about maybe some of the current landscape of what products are available within the portfolio today. So as you know, there are a lot of choices out there for PDM and PLM, and within the Hawk Ridge portfolio, there's still some choices that you may want to make and look for what's the right solution for me. So we brought this slide up previously in the presentation when we've got a good handle on our PDM situation. We've eliminated duplicates, we've gotten rid of the missing references issues, and we don't have to start from scratch. But if getting a handle on the files and getting a nice bill of materials and maybe a bit of a process in place isn't quite enough, that's where we need to start thinking about, well, who else is a stakeholder in that process? When I'm creating product data, does it involve external collaborators? Does it involve other departments? What tools do they need? There's pretty much a guarantee that there's a tool that would fit that department's need or that external user's needs within this portfolio. Probably the best way that I think about it today is there's sort of two paths that we have available. There's the cloud native options that are completely on cloud, software as a service based, and you guys know this as the 3D Experience platform. Now, when we talk about data management or product lifecycle management inside of the 3D Experience platform, these fall under the Innovia brand name. Okay, so within those tools, there's different ways you can take advantage of it. If you're going to use it as simple PDM or even all the way up to PLM and taking full advantage of those capabilities, you're doing that on cloud. Now, the other path that typically you would go is the desktop solutions. Like we talked about with SOLIDWORKS PDM, SOLIDWORKS Manage is the PLM system that works in conjunction with that. It's a nice way for us to keep a familiar feel with the Windows interface and deploying on Windows servers. We have that kind of feel that we're used to within the desktop environment. And I do also want to point out these can be deployed on cloud as well. We have plenty of customers that do that today with tools like Microsoft Azure or AWS. We can put those on a Windows server that's essentially located anywhere. But one of the advantages I would say is the granular control over your infrastructure. You can choose your own security protocol and manage all that stuff if you have the resources to help you with it. That would be probably the biggest differentiator between these two that you need to think about is, do I have the resources to manage all this stuff internally? If I need some help with it, or if there's a better solution that's just sort of plug and play, there's a lot of options available to us nowadays.
Yeah, really, with all of these options, they're all here to manage your data, and they're all going to do the same thing. What it really boils down to is, what do you as a company have available to you on the resource section, right?
Yeah.
What can you allocate towards these resources? And based on what you have available to you, we have these solutions to help you out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you said it very well. They all, at their core function, do the same thing. They're going to track revisions. They're going to make sure people don't step on each other's toes and overwrite work. But what other things do I need to consider to go along with that? Now, if I'm speaking within the 3D Experience realm and what options we have available there, there's a kind of a particular growth path that I can think about in terms of how would I dip my feet into the 3D Experience platform. For most of our customers, that's going to start with using traditional SOLIDWORKS with a connection to 3D Experience to do whatever it is they're interested in. And I say that from the perspective of there's a lot of tools included with things like cloud services that now come with SOLIDWORKS, but I can use it to different levels depending on what I need. If I'm just going to share a file with an external collaborator and ask them to mark it up, okay, great, I can use those tools, but I could also take it to the level of doing full management and control of my design with things like issue reporting, task management, change actions. Those can all be taken advantage of within that realm. And the nice part is, once you've already gotten your data into this environment, this vast platform, Well, now I can start using the other tools that are there. So it's a pretty streamlined growth path, to be honest. You still get to use the SOLIDWORKS tools that you know and love, but if I wanted to do now some advanced simulation or include business process modeling or maybe collaboration with other departments with specific tools that they need, there's a lot of stuff available within that ecosystem. The same concept applies to what we're talking about in the desktop realm. If I'm using SOLIDWORKS and PDM, maybe currently I'm just on PDM standard doing simple things like securing the vault and tracking revisions. Okay, that's great, but I have a path I can use to upgrade into other things like process and lifecycle management. Maybe I take advantage of SOLIDWORKS Manage to build up some of those advanced processes for other departments that connect to my CAD data.
Yeah, and what I really like about these graphics too is it really shows how scalable these systems really are. Kind of shows all of these entry points and really how inviting it is to come in to join in at any one of these stages of the process, whether you need everything all at once or you just want to start small and kind of grow into these tools.
Yeah.
Very scalable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you'd mentioned familiarity and comfortability too. I want to take a moment to kind of just speculate on that because like I said before, a lot of these tools are very similar in nature. They're going to do some of the same things at the end of the day. Freddie, what do you notice about looking at this screen here?
I can't really tell. It looks like an add-in, but is this the platform? Is this the desktop?
This is actually 3D Experience data management. So you're going to use it inside of SOLIDWORKS just like you would SOLIDWORKS PDM.
I couldn't even tell. They look so similar.
They do. They do look very similar. And you're going to take a lot of the same actions as you would with any of the other tools, as you'll see here. So if I wanted to take ownership of a design, like checking out in PDM, we would lock the files with 3D Experience. I can create a new revision. I can leave comments about what it is I'm changing. I can push the CAD files through some form of a life cycle. Think of a workflow in PDM to indicate what is the release status of this file. There's all kinds of stuff to take advantage of right within SOLIDWORKS, so it feels very comfortable for that type of environment. Like we've seen already.
There's that PDM add-in that we were looking for.
There we go. It doesn't look that much different. It's just SOLIDWORKS plugged with PDM, and I can take advantage of the revision tracking, checking in and out, those types of things. But also keep in mind too, like Freddie has covered with us, we have a full Windows user interface that we can take advantage of in Explorer to do things as a non-CAD user. Take measurements, mark things up. If I want to go search for things or use those fancy favorite searches that you developed for us.
Go see those files that need to be approved.
That's right. So I can do it all from those comfortable environments. Again, same is true for SOLIDWORKS Manage. We have an add-in where I can see the PLM environment and how the CAD file relates to what's going on. But potentially I want to do more than that. SOLIDWORKS Manage has a very familiar Windows-like interface too. You see the ribbon of commands, we have file browsing, object browsing, if you will, to take advantage of those other pieces of data. Some of it's going to come from PDM, maybe some of it comes from other sources. If you've got other documentation, non-CAD records that you want to track, they all go into this one umbrella with a tool like Manage PLM. But then I start to take advantage of all the other things that I want to develop and grow into. So if I am going to develop more advanced processes to get into those other departments and handle their people tasks or what have you, maybe I'm going to start to get into things like project management. This is really nice from a deliverables perspective because I might have CAD files or simulations that I'm running and I need to account for the time that's imposed on the CAD files themselves. Well, I could track some of that here if I wanted to. I could also take advantage of statistical data, things that are going on in the system. And I know you're a fan of this, Freddie, the visual aspect of what we're looking at here.
Yeah, it looks almost kind of like that status report tool we were talking about earlier with all these graphs and visual information. Just, again, at a glance, you can see what's going on.
Right. So when we're working in this PLM system, we have the PDM component that's housing our files, but there's also going to be these other records, things that get created that I want to track specifically in a certain way. Maybe what ECOs have been fulfilled for a particular customer or a particular location around the globe. I want to see how long things are waiting in the queue to get done. We can get some of that out of PDM, but not in as visual of a perspective as we have within Manage. It's very easy to develop those reporting and dashboarding capabilities. To give us more information and quickly make decisions is really kind of what it comes down to. So if you're thinking about the tips and tricks, the concepts we've covered so far today, or maybe something new that you haven't gotten into and you just got some great ideas, you might also be thinking, where should I get started? And I think most of you guys know this already, but we're here to help, right? Any part of that conversation that you want us involved in, we're there to help you strategize to meet a particular goal that you have. So I would encourage you, take what you've seen today or maybe some things you've been thinking about, talk internally about what your goals are, and if you want us involved in helping with that conversation, we're more than happy to do so. But at the end of the day, what we would want to talk to you about is, what are your requirements? You have some goals in mind, how do we get there? That's what we're going to help you fulfill along the way as you're taking this path. And probably the most important thing to consider is, once we have an idea of what those goals and requirements are, we can start to direct you towards what is the right solution to fit that plan. And it's going to involve a software component, of course, but also potentially implementation or later phases of an implementation if you already have PDM or Manage in place, or you're using 3D Experience. We can help to kind of tailor that solution to fit what exactly you need right now. And it's not just in the PDM and PLM realm. This is for really any tool that you're using within the Hawk Ridge Systems portfolio. So.
Yeah, what I really like here is that your first point on that slide is talk about your goals, right? It's really important to think about that too, especially if you're first getting into one of these data management solutions. Is really what we like to say is, the more planning that you put into it, the better outcome you're going to have.
Yeah,
right?
100% agree with that.
Sitting down and understanding, right, how do we want our files managed? How do we want this to work? These tools are very configurable, which, right, it's very helpful, but if you don't know which direction you want to go in, it could be hurtful. So
yeah.
It's always good to sit down and make that plan of attack so that we can execute.
Yep, definitely agree. And that's been the most successful implementations that I've seen, is where we had a lot of good conversation up front, all the right stakeholders involved. So don't think about what just you need to do inside of the system. PDM and PLM really incorporates everyone at your company. So get some input would be my advice.
Definitely. And speaking of incorporating everyone, let's incorporate some more winners into this webinar.
All right, let's do it. We got some great giveaways.
All right, so we have one more of these Tetris lights here, right? And this winner goes to Eric Chen. Congratulations, Eric.
Congratulations, Eric.
On your Tetris lamp.
Very nice.
We have 2 more giveaways to go here, so kind of our next tier of prizes is going to be this 3D Connection Space Mouse. And this is going to go to, moment of truth, Janet Montesanto. Congratulations, Janet, on your
congrats.
3D Connection Space Mouse. And last but definitely not least, moment of truth, is going to be this mini drone that we see here. I like that landscape there. It looks pretty familiar to you, Brandon?
Yeah, pretty close to home, I would say. But,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't talk about drones very much anymore. I kind of lost one, crashed it into a tree, so.
That's tough. Well,
can I win this, Freddie?
Let's see if you win. Drum roll, please. Maria Wall. Congratulations, Maria. Sorry, Brandon, but congratulations, Maria. We hope you enjoy that drone and take some notes from Brandon over here. Let's keep it in a safe, open environment.
Good advice, good advice. Well, I think there was a lot of other good advice here today too. Tips and tricks, things you guys can take advantage of, or maybe strategies that you're thinking about you want to implement and you're not sure where to start. So hopefully it was a helpful session for you guys. We enjoyed having everyone here. Hopefully you got some questions answered, but I think that'll do it for today. We've shared as much as we can for right now. So we thank you guys for attending. Those that won some of the giveaways, we hope you guys enjoy, and we'll see you for the next one.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, everyone.